All right, so we're live here with Mayor Gregor Robertson. This is our final chat in Metro series before the election, talking to the mayoral candidates. So welcome, Gregor.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Gregor, you're running for your third term on November 15th. I have to ask you, last time around, you did run on a promise to end street homelessness by 2015, which is 3 months away.
Right.
Is that still possible? Can you still meet that goal?
It is still possible. We've got hundreds of units of housing opening up over the next number of weeks. So a partnership with BC Housing that has basically 3 buildings opening up, 259 units of housing opening in the next couple months, and a whole bunch of shelter space as well, but 100 units of shelter as well. So we're focused on trying to get everybody inside before the winter gets serious. And there looks like we'll have lots of capacity in terms of housing and shelter spaces. And that's, you know, it's coming right at the end here, and we'll need to keep building beyond this winter to make sure that we stay ahead and make sure there is space for everyone to be inside. So
you just mentioned less than 400 units, but I believe as of the March count, there was still 500 people sleeping.
Yeah, over 500, about 538, and we have been opening some housing since that count. So in the spring and summer, a couple more buildings opened as well, and that's you know, brought the number down, we think, a little bit since last March. But looks like we have enough capacity to get everybody off the street, and that's the goal, was to create enough this fall to make sure everyone has an option.
And speaking with getting everyone off the street, yesterday the Oppenheimer Park decision came down from the judge. Mm-hmm. She noted that the city promised to open more permanent housing by mid-October, and she gave the campers 1 more week to give the city the opportunity to house them. And this was another question from a reader, was, will the city really be able to house all the people in the camp by next week?
Yeah, the housing is a challenge because the housing buildings are opening up in the weeks beyond next week. So we have shelter space available now, but 100 units of shelter space have been opened up. And we have housing coming in the weeks ensuing. So it's really going to be about people transitioning from the park into shelter space and housing. That we're still trying to estimate exactly how many people do need housing from the park. That's ranged from about 50 to over 100. So that work is being done. We've had city staff in the park pretty much every day, and BC Housing staff there asking people if they need housing and trying to shift people. So we're hopeful for a peaceful resolution and that we can get everyone into either shelter or housing space over this next week. And
so once they're in the shelters, the goal is then to get them to housing. How will you track that to make sure these campers are getting into housing?
We've had actually over 500 people move from the street through shelters into housing over the last several years. That's been part of our program with BC Housing. So it's been successful in getting hundreds of people through shelters as a kind of stepping ladder to the housing, so they can get stable, and we can get the housing units available from there. So it's worked for lots of people. We're continuing with that path. Sometimes it's hard for people to go from the street right to having their own place in a building. Sometimes the shelter is helpful in between there, and sometimes the housing isn't available and we need a shelter to basically fill the gap.
Another question on housing. This is top of mind for our readers. In a poll of almost 700 people, affordable housing was far and away the most important issue. Despite policies that you've had over the past 6 years to increase the rental housing stock, affordability continues to be an issue for a lot of people, whether they're on welfare rates or whether they're making that average income for a bachelor's degree of $41,000 a year.
Right.
What policies would you implement this time around to try to alleviate some of that struggle?
Yeah, well, it's a big struggle in Vancouver, and even for people in middle income because of the housing cost. So we've been really focused on getting rental housing built. We've now got about 1,000 units a year being created for the last 2 years. This year looks like we'll beat that mark, and Vision is committed to getting 4,000 units built over the next 4 years. That's what we approve at City Hall. We have the opposite sort of approach from the NPA, who are not interested in making sure rental housing gets built. They're let the market decide and you're on your own. So we will stay committed to getting rental housing built. And it's a range of affordability for people. If you have a combined household income of 86,000, that's sort of the top of the bracket where we try to get rental housing built for. So it's a mix of housing around the city. It's new rental housing, so it comes in a little higher, but it creates more space and more vacancy. And for so many years, we didn't have rental housing built, and that put us behind the 8 ball. So we'll continue focusing on that.
Right. But I guess for the people that are the average people, say making 41 grand, which are new numbers for the bachelor's degree
Right.
folks, for that to be affordable housing, they'd need to be paying rent of about $1,000 a month. Do you have any intention of building units that would rent at that rate?
Well, we're trying to get as much affordability as we can with the new rental housing. Obviously, it depends where it is in the city, how dense it is. All those are factors in it, and we have had some success getting close to that, but it's obviously difficult downtown. We're looking at also getting more family units, 2 and 3 bedroom units. When we released our affordability agenda yesterday, we talked about bumping up to 35% with 2 and 3 bedroom units, so young families have a chance to live in an apartment in the city and not be forced to move out. So we're hopeful we'll get that combination. But again, it'll be across a range of incomes, and it's tough in Vancouver. It's something we just can't let up on. We have to keep pushing as hard as we can and recognizing it's expensive land here.
And about pushing as hard as you can, with the yesterday you said 35% would be the target for 2 to 3 bedroom units in these new condos that families could live in.
In big developments.
In big developments. Yeah. So why not just regulate 35% instead of targeting for 35%?
Well, it's built into the formula when the city staff negotiate with the developers on a rezoning. So that's what we expect them to achieve in the negotiation. They may come back and say, well, we can get more social housing, or we can get more childcare in the mix. But that's the target that we want them shooting for when they negotiate.
Another issue that came up for our readers was transparency, was their third biggest issue. Do you support an online lobbyist registry?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely supportive of that. We look at the province and the federal government who dictate in many cases what our laws are, and we've pushed really hard to basically give Vancouver more jurisdiction, more ability to govern our own affairs. We've been really focused on open data and releasing expenses of councillors at City Hall, and we need to keep stepping up in terms of transparency.
Would you go the next step, and would you institute an online lobbyist registry in your next term?
I'm certainly open to it. Yeah, I'd like to see what that looks like in practice.
There's one in Toronto.
There is one in Toronto. There are a few other cities that have done this, and certainly it's become the norm for provincial and national governments as well.
Mm-hmm. Another question on that. There is a sense that a lot of decisions that are made at the city, especially regarding property, are happening behind closed doors. And there's a sense that the deal is done before the public hearing. What steps would you take to combat that sense among the community?
Yeah, well, we have a very rigorous process with rezonings, public hearings. There's a process where we review all of this in public, and decisions are made in public, and people have the opportunity to give input. Beyond that, Vision has been calling for an end to corporate and union donations in political campaigns. We've been doing that for 6 years, vigorously to the BC government who make that decision. We haven't got that yet. We should have limits on our campaign donations. The NPA had $1 million donor in the last election, which is absurd. And there's too much money in politics, and I don't think that helps the cause. So we'll keep pushing very hard for that to change.
You guys aren't exactly hard up for cash either. I know there's been a lot of talk about a specific $25,000 lunch. Another question from a reader is, would you post donations throughout the year and not just during campaign periods? Do you think that's something that political parties should consider? Yeah,
we've done all of the accountability pieces that we're required to do by law, and we play on a level playing field with respect to reporting on all of our campaign finances and all the fundraising that takes place. It's important that be strengthened, though, and that's why I've called repeatedly for there to be limits on donations, more reporting, a ban on corporate union donations. These, I think, are important steps. Unfortunately, the BC government decides what happens on this, and they made some changes for this election, but nowhere near what we were calling for. They say they'll do it for the next election, 4 years away, but we were hoping that that would be in place now.
So I think one last question. I started the timer a little late, I think. Yesterday, we got promised quite a few freebies from Vision and the NPA. Free swimming lessons for the children from you guys and free parking on Sundays from the NPA. Any more fun free promises coming up?
Well, free promises, I mean, we released our affordability agenda. I think it really speaks to how different Vision and the NPA are. We're focused on affordable housing and childcare and making sure kids have an opportunity to learn to swim is another one. The NPA is focused on free parking, and in the case of that free parking promise, that's a $7 million hole in the city budget. So I don't know if they're going to cut affordable housing programs, they're going to cut childcare, or they're going to raise taxes to make up the difference. I don't. It's again a lot of inexperience on their side that is making kind of random suggestions like this. When our focus stays on the priorities of affordable housing and making sure people can live and thrive in Vancouver.
Okay, great. Well, that is a lot of you would like to ask more questions. Thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for watching and listening to this series. It's been a fun experiment, and I hope you enjoyed it. Take care.